Italian Wine Podcast. Chin Chin with Italian wine people.
Italian Wine Podcast, as Wine2wine 2020 media partner,
is proud to present a series of sessions chosen to highlight key themes and ideas
and recorded during the 2-day event
held on November 23rd and 24th, 2020.
Wine2wine 2020 represented the
First ever fully digital edition of the Business to Business Forum. Visit wine2wine.net
and make sure to attend future editions of Wine2wine Business Forum.
Hello, this is Monty Waldin at Wine2wine 2020. Subject today is how can audio help the wine industry in a digitized post-COVID world? My guests are Lawrence Francis and Paul Caputo, who are based in the UK and have used or are using podcasting as an adjunct to some form of business.
Hello.
Yeah, hi, Lawrence. Why bother with a podcast?
Why bother with a podcast? I am the host and founder of Interpreting Wine, and I get asked that question all the time, really. And I think 2020 being the crazy year that it is, it's really given me some time to sit down with an Excel spreadsheet and figure out what exactly is happening when I hit publish on an episode. So I've really, today, really for the first time, I'm going to be presenting some fresh data around what is actually happening. How is my audience? How is the wine trade engaging with those episodes? So what's typically happened is that people have just shared the number of listens that's happened, but I have chosen to look at something, I think, that gets really to the heart of what happened. So actually looking at three factors together. So the percentage of an episode that's played, which I think is important. If somebody is obviously playing a much smaller amount, then they're going to get less from that episode, and it's going to be less. You can infer it's going to be less useful for them. Obviously, the episode length itself. So a longer episode, I think, gives an opportunity for my guests, a lot of them who are winemakers, who are producers, who are educators, to really get their point across. And then looking at the number of plays, how many times are people actually accessing that, to give an overall engagement time. So again, those three factors. So the percentage of the episode that's played times the episode length times the number of plays, I think, gives a much more meaningful indicator, and it gives you the number of hours that people are spending consuming your content. And I've done this for my year to date, and since the start of 2020, and obviously through all of the lockdown, I can see that my audience has been engaging with my content right the way across the channel for a total of 51,000 hours, which if you haven't got a calculator to hand, is around 2,100 days, or around 5 years and 11 months. So basically, the long and the short of it, for me, is that something like my podcast, when it's being broadcast out there, it's really reaching people. It's really giving people a lot of content, a lot of engagement, and I think far in excess of other sort of snackable content, sort of short videos or tweets or short articles. And breaking that down to an individual episode, the average engagement for each episode published in 2020 has been 380 hours, which is kind of around 16 days. So I think, why would you want a podcast? I think, especially in these modern times when we are challenged to gather together, when we're challenged to use our traditional channels to reach the wine trade, which is my main audience, we have to find an alternative. And I know that people have looked at Zoom, have looked at Instagram Live. I really think that podcasting has its place in that, especially when one does that analysis and sees that each episode, each producer insight or each bit of educational content that I've produced and have published it in 2020 has resulted in 16 days of listening across the trade in 111 countries.
Okay, Paul. Any comments on that? I mean, you were an early listener to podcasts before you had your wine business. Why did you add a podcast to Venerandum, your business?
Yeah, well, I mean, as you say, I was an early listener. I think I got my first iPod 20 years ago, and podcasts were available on that. And I used to listen to all sorts of content. And the reason was simple, really. It was the versatility and where you could listen to them and what you could do at the same time. And that, I think, has taken a very long time to sink in with people. Maybe it's the fact that the technology is now in people's hands far more than it was sort of 15, 20 years ago. But I think the reality is now that the technology is facilitating both creators and listeners in a way like never before. And I think people are now rapidly understanding that listening to a podcast is a very intimate experience. You can almost feel like you're in a room with a stranger, and somebody that you maybe know of from distance. But after a few episodes, it's like you know that person, and that can be an extremely powerful marketing tool. You can gain a familiarity with people that you never would otherwise. And I think my background in the wine trade, based in the northwest of England in Chester, was one that has always been very isolated from what I thought was where the wine industry was taking place. And I felt like in my early years, I didn't have access to the kind of people, the kind of networking opportunities that maybe I would have wanted. And podcasting was a great way to learn and watch what people were doing.
Lawrence?
Hello?
Any comments?
Yeah, I mean, I think, there's that, what Paul said there, I think wine2wine, credit to you guys. I listened back to your 2018 panel discussion on podcasting the other day. I think, you've been really, leading the way, and you've been telling people all of these things, I think, over many years. I just think it's really been quite revolutionary for me to actually do that analysis and actually see, this is what happens when you press play. Because I mean, as you as a fellow podcaster, it's often can just feel like these things kind of go out there into the air. And I think that because of how the audience interact with other content in their everyday lives, say Netflix or Hulu or other content channels, there's not always the direct feedback. When was the last time you sort of left a rating on Netflix or gave the feedback? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you have got feedback from your listeners. What were the key points that you found in terms of you said you did some a series of podcasts.
Sure,
in particular.
Sure.
Why did that help you?
Yeah, so I mean, I think leading on to that, just to give the broad context. Yeah, as I say, probably too much time on my hands during lockdown, so I was able to really sort of dive into the data, and really went in with an open mind and found that I had put myself out there as the wanting to be like the Netflix of wine podcasts, wanting to put series out there. Did it very intuitively when I really first started doing it 2 years ago. But it's only this year, it's only now since I've done the analysis that I've got the figures that say 2-part series have an uptick of 38% in engagement, 38% more listening than the channel average. And when series get to 7 episodes or more, the average is over 48% of an uptick of listening. So people are engaging a lot more with a series. It kind of draws them in as I thought it might, rather than here's an episode on Italian wine, here's an episode on Spanish wine. It's like, no, let's actually draw out that engagement possibility. And I call it making the target bigger for people to land on one of those 3, 4, 5 episodes that are part of that series, and then they can kind of, if you like, spread out and look at those other episodes of that same series, and that's absolutely drawn out by that analysis.
Okay, back to Paul. Obviously, Paul, your podcast obviously could have been listened to by anybody. It did have a trade focus. Why was that important to you?
To keep the trade focus, I think. Yeah. Like Lawrence, the origins were in that lockdown period where, who knows, who knew what was going to happen. But for me, it was that so much of my wine career and journey had been involved either with a retail customer up in the Northwest or internationally. So in Italy, in different countries where I'd been judging and then going on press trips and that kind of thing. And my connection with the UK wine trade was not really, that strong. And so for me, it was a great opportunity to do that kind of networking and to maybe add some value to the Italian trade. I get a lot of emails sort of saying, "Oh, Paul, you're in the UK. Can you put us in touch with a buyer here or a journalist there?" And I felt like it was time to sort of use the opportunity to build more of a connection with the UK, because after all, Italians are very good, I think, of asking you where you are rather than what you do, and wherever you say you are, is what you therefore must do.
Okay. Quick question for Lawrence. You've been working with a wine merchant in London, Davies, and you've come up with a very innovative way of allowing the public to get a tasting note in a very authentic way. Just explain how that works.
Yeah, sure. I think, the whole title of the session, beyond podcasting. So, I like to think that, can bring something new and what else really. And so, in really heightened by lockdown and really sort of advanced by lockdown, I've been working with Davies wine merchants on producing a set of producer tasting notes. So these are audio tasting notes. So in the traditional sense, you can go to the Davies website, daviewine.co.uk, and you can go and you can look by region, by grape, and all the usual stuff. But what they've got that I don't believe any other retailer in the world has got, if there is one out there, please let me know, is you can actually go to the wine page, see the bottle of wine, see the region, see the grape, see the ABV, all the usual stuff. But then there's actually a little player there on the page itself. You click play and you get an authentic audio note direct from the producer. So you're hearing about it in the voice. So if you're in Italy and you're up in Tuscany, then you're gonna hear that coming through in the voice of the producer. If you're looking at a Pinot from Ceccano estate over in central Otago, then you're going to be hearing direct from the winemaker over there with his Kiwi accent and his sort of his way of communicating. So that really, again, I think is the way to bring together the producer and the customer. And in a way, let the merchant just be the one to kind of facilitate that. I think in the same way that traditionally Davies have brought their customers and producers together at organized tastings. Now that that's off the menu, it's like, okay, how can we bring them together? I think what it does really, that I think again nobody else is really doing, is it's on demand. So it's there and kind of ready whenever you want. You don't have to sort of turn up for a tasting and open all the bottles. You can just sort of, have it at your own time. And also think audio first is really important, because audio is not as intrusive really as video. You're only asking for one channel in people's attention. You're only asking for their ears, and you're not asking for their eyes. So they can be listening in while they're still with their friends, and it's not so intrusive. It's not like, let's all sit around the TV and watch this. It can just be there in the background, and people can play it as they need to.
Yeah, and also what's nice about it, I think, is it's just audio, so there's no pictures or anything like that, so you can jog and not feel that you're missing something whilst you're jogging and you're listening to the tasting notes. Paul, what do you think of that as an idea?
Absolutely, yeah.
Paul, what do you think of that as an idea?
I think it's a great idea, really, and I think that for anybody who has been following the podcast journey, the conversation really isn't about are podcasts good or worth the effort anymore. It's about how do you push on now to the next level? Because, for example, I consider myself to be someone who is a big fan of podcasts and has always sort of been following the story. But just before we came on, I did a little search for, the top 100 podcasts to listen to right now. And I knew about 2 of them, which to me showed me just how much content is now being made at such a speed. And the inevitable reality of that is that, production values are going up. The amount of money being spent on marketing is going up, and things are moving really fast, and money's going into the writing of these podcasts as well. And so I think what you're seeing now are people who are truly committing to the medium, are really having to look for creative ways to stand out and to do something different.
Sorry, go ahead. Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt you.
Yeah, no, I think because, at the end of the day, we've all seen a lot of talking heads, and we're all used to having this kind of intimate access to people we may be curious about now. And I think that the question is what happens next.
Yeah, interesting enough, I got a call yesterday, I kid you not, from a well-known wine magazine that I write for. And the question was, how do we get a podcast going? What would we use it for? How could it work, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And, they would never have sent that email, even, I think, 2 or 3 years ago. They've got new owners there, obviously, that have picked up on this idea. And audio, I grew up with radio more than TV. As we've all agreed, that it's an easier medium for people to consume. I think you're not distracted by anything, and you're also not hoodwinked by, beautiful panoramas of vineyards. It's really about you and somebody else. Anybody got anything else that they haven't said and want to say before we get turned off?
I may just add around the audio tasting notes. So it is available online, sort of before you buy, as I say, on the Davies website, and then of course subsequently after you buy, when you're sitting at home with the wine. But just sort of push things along. It's also available now in the retail shop, so it's actually physically available there. And how we've put that in place is to assign a QR code to the audio, and then as you're in the Davies shop walking around, you can just scan that QR code next to the wine, and if you like, all of a sudden the producer is stood there next to you telling you about the wine in your hand. And I think that's how you sort of break the fourth wall and make this something that people can kind of take with them at home, but then also in a retail environment as well. Retail's not dead by any means. I don't think COVID has sort of tested it, but it's definitely a resilient channel as well.
Are there any preferred platforms that people should be thinking about if they're doing a podcast in terms of good listening?
I've only ever used Libsyn, Libsyn, for my hosting needs. It's one of the top ones out there. There are loads and loads available. I've just always found that to be very reliable. I've never had any access problems with my podcast, so I would wholeheartedly recommend them to anybody that's keen to give it a go. They have plans from about $5 a month. So there is a small cost with podcasts that you generally can't get around, but $5.
Okay, so just go into those costs again. Obviously it's not just about the hosting, it's about equipment. What do you need to do it yourself?
Okay, the super short version is, for the session last year, I actually produced a summary of kit and hosting and all of the software and all of that. It's available at interpretingwine.com/kit, KIT, and that they'll have like an 8 or so page PDF. But basically, it's if you're going to do them in person, the way I started was just a mic like this, You just need software to do the editing. You can get free software out there. And then you need somewhere to put it. Basically, you need a podcast host. These things, the processes have become much easier over the years. Years and years ago, it was quite a technical thing. Now the barrier to entry is super low. And I think I did do the costing at the time. It's probably around, I mean, this is a Zoom H1, which is the mic that I started with. It's about £100. And then you're probably looking at, an ongoing cost of maybe around $10, $15 or euros or pounds, around that sort of amount.
Okay. Paul, any comments on the sort of startup costs and the time and the hassle and the aggravation?
Yeah, I think the startup costs, as Lawrence says, are now pretty minimal. You know, you probably need a decent microphone and you need a decent internet connection if you're going to talk to guests remotely. But I think anybody can do it if they want to. I think for me, one of the big challenges and one of the one of the reasons that has shown me just how impressive it is that Lawrence puts out the content, as frequently as he does, is just how much time and mental energy it takes up to pull guests together, to keep the content interesting, to keep to keep pushing the boundaries and improving the show. Really, I mean, one example is it took me weeks to organize a conversation with a winemaker, and I was really keen to have this person on, and eventually, after numerous cancellations, they connected on a phone in a church. You couldn't hear a thing, and it was like, I think it was like on the top of a mountain as well. And it just it's hard sometimes to, despite how much proactive effort you put into explaining what you need to make this work, it's hard for people to understand the challenges as much as you do. And so if you're going to do a podcast that relies on guests to do the heavy lifting, to do, to provide the interesting content, and you're not going to just sit there and talk yourself, it can be quite an all-consuming project. But the flip side of that is that podcasting is a tremendously powerful tool and a great opportunity, I think, for wineries and anybody with a wine business to engage an audience.
Mm-hmm. What about using it as a tool for, analytics? I heard a comment about, why certain wines sell and certain wines don't sell. Can it be used as an analytical tool for wine merchants?
I think there are two ways of maybe looking at the analytics. One is, who's listening and where are those people listening. But I think you've got to really insert opportunities within the content of the podcast to really measure its effectiveness. And I think that's one of the other things that can maybe make people who start podcasts sort of drift away, because they're not, they can lose sight of why they're doing it. The listens are maybe not quite as they expected, and if there's no articulated reason for why they're doing it, other than it's something they might quite like to do and it's probably useful, then I think it can be tricky.
Mm-hmm. Lawrence, you take great pride in really putting a huge amount of effort into your podcast. So when I go back to this idea of the series, we often think of a podcast as sort of bite-sized chunks. You hear it, you forget about it, and then you move on. Yeah. And you made life difficult for yourself in New Zealand and America by doing these thousands of episodes series, but it paid off. Why do you think that is? Yeah,
I think I'm happy to share practical examples here. So just very briefly, I'll talk about the series I did earlier this year, actually, when we were still able to travel back in January over in the Willamette Valley. So I went over there, interviewed 20 winemakers in January. The episodes were released in February and March. These were long episodes as well. What I kind of hadn't really anticipated was how eloquent and just how engaging these conversations were going to be. And the average episode duration was 50 minutes, right the way across all 20 episodes. The shortest was half an hour. The longest was 68 minutes. So really, yeah, closely around that sort of 50 minute mark. And people, yeah, they engaged with that series more than any other series that I've done. The average episode listening is 519 hours, which is like double the channel sort of all-time average of 253. And I just think, yeah, again, it's back to that whole thing of you got the series as the format, which we've already really spoken about. But I think then it really just comes back to the guests themselves. You know, are those people engaging? Are they passionate? Do they make good wine? Of course, but you know, really, you know, in an audio setting, it's not the same as at a tasting. So people are not tasting the wine. People are listening to the stories and engaging with the producers.
Yeah, I was just about to talk about the importance of storytelling and also the idea that everybody now has a 2-second attention span. And quite clearly, that is not the case. And especially a little bit like we're doing today, but this is different. But this idea of storytelling and letting winemakers really tell everything that they know and want to share with people without any kind of barrier between them and the audience, and you're just simply standing there with a microphone, and that's really all you're doing. So do you think we're going to see more of this? Paul, do you think that this kind of storytelling thing has got legs?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that professionals in the media world are now starting to consider their careers down this path. You know, I think one of my favorite football pundits, James Richardson, who works with Italian football a lot, he has gone his own way and really invested with a little team to put a podcast together, and the focus is on storytelling. And I think that's what a lot of people want to hear. You know, it's great if you're thinking about your business and your career to hear from different people in the industry and just keep in touch with what's going on. But in terms of entertainment, I think the storytelling element is critical.
Okay. Final question, if we can squeeze one in. What are the main differences between video and audio content?
I mean, yeah, I think it's really just that yeah, you don't have the visual, but I think, you know, perhaps more interestingly for me is just that level of intimacy. I relate it to what the difference between podcasting and video is for me is like watching a film or reading a book. I feel there's actually a lot more engagement that happens inside the brains of the listener. Right? It's I guess another bit of research that I should be doing as an ex-psychologist. You know, I should be looking at what's going on inside the brains of the listeners. But I'm convinced, you know, because you have to. I think as you hear something, you fill it in. You start to imagine what people look like. You start to imagine if they're sitting in that church on the top of that mountain, like Paul was saying earlier. You know, your brain, I believe, it just can't help itself. It just has to fill in those blanks. And I think that if you've got that investment in creating that virtual world inside your own head, you've got that greater engagement in the content. And I think it's going to keep you tuned in, and I think it's going to make you remember, and I think it's going to make you take action afterwards if it's something that you like and that you've stuck with over that duration of that episode or that series.
Perfect. Well, I hope our listeners have got a lot out of this podcast in terms of practical advice and sensible suggestions from our two panelists today. And hopefully we'll see some sort of resurrection for Paul back behind the microphone at some stage.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and Lawrence, thanks very much for all your analytics, etc., etc.
Yeah, no problem.
Alrighty, thanks very much for listening, everybody. Ciao.
Ciao.
Listen to the Italian Wine Podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We're on SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, Himalaya FM, and more. Don't forget to subscribe and rate the show. If you enjoy listening, please consider donating through ItalianWinePodcast.com. Any amount helps cover equipment, production, and publication costs. Until next time, cin cin.